Hey everybody, Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of catching up with somebody that you all know. If you've been paying attention to us over, the last almost, 18 years, Adam Nitti, bassist extraordinaire, educator, composer, so many things, contributor to Bass Musician Magazine. He helped us out with technique classes and things like that. So I know you all know who Adam is, and it's very exciting to get a chance now in 2024 to catch up and chat with Adam. And I did want to touch base on something that maybe we haven't had a chance to talk about before, and that is how you got started in music and particularly on bass, Adam.
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, for having me. And wow, you said 18 years, and that took me aback there. That's hard to believe, but yeah, appreciate all of your support throughout the years. What an awesome publication. How I got started, I'll try to put the Reader's Digest version together because it's quite a long story, but it all just started in my youth. My mother's side of the family, super musical, always has been. My first real influence was my grandfather on my mother's side, and he was a highly trained and pretty successful classical pianist and violinist. So from a very early age, he was introducing me to music and sitting me at the piano on his lap and all of that. And so I developed an affinity for music really, really early. Around 5 years old, got my first instrument, which was a toy guitar from my uncle, and I was strumming that and just sort of doing what I could do at that age, and just always was attracted to music. And then my parents, seeing my interest in it, they decided to enroll me in classical piano lessons around 8 or 9. So my first formal training was in classical piano. And so I did that for a number of years. And as I got older, the friends that I was hanging out with and the kind of music that we liked to listen to was rock music, rock and roll music. And my classical upbringing wasn't quite as compatible with that as I would have liked. So I rebelled a little bit and started to tell my parents, I'm not really interested in lessons as much anymore. I wanted to learn how to play rock music. But the missing link for me was I didn't have an instrument for that. I couldn't cart a piano around to garage band practice and, never mind the fact that it wouldn't sound right for most of the songs. So my parents, they did a really kind thing, and they bought me my very first synthesizer, and it was a Korg Poly 61. I still remember it like it was yesterday. And I was able to emulate a lot of the sounds of the bands that I was listening to. Like at the time, we were big time into bands like Journey and Genesis and bands like that. So I started a band with my good friends, and I was the keyboard player. And my amplifier was a stereo receiver and a couple Pioneer speakers. And we had myself, keyboards, didn't have a singer. We had a guitar player, and we had a bass player and a drummer. And one day, playing our cover songs, our bass player announced at the end he was interested in starting to play rhythm guitar. And so we didn't have a bass player anymore. So I volunteered to give it a shot. He lent me his bass. And the rest is history. I fell in love with the instrument. I started around 13 or 14 years old. And what began as sort of a dual role for me, playing both bass and keyboards together in our little garage band, that was a great exercise in independence. And it taught me how to tap while I was playing chords on the keyboard. And so it was kind of this neat little shtick that I had worked up for some of the songs we were doing. But having picked up the bass, I immediately started listening to bass players and the bass lines that we were, trying to recreate. And so I fell in love with Geddy Lee and Chris Squire and John Paul Jones and all these bass players that all y'all know. And I got so enamored with the bass that I kind of let keyboards go as a performance instrument. I still write and compose on keyboards a good bit, but that's what got me started. And then the rest was just a lot of hard knocks and real life experiences.
Nice. Well, and I'm sure, like many musicians, you're constantly, I think, assessing where the needs are. And that is part of what has taken you to do a lot of the things that you've done. For example, early on with Music Dojo, there wasn't much in the way of internet music education and stuff. So tell us a little more about that journey and how you took that.
Yeah, so you're speaking to the sort of the educational side that I dove into around that time. Music Dojo was as the best we knew, was the first online based music school. I guess we can call it a school. It was courses that were administered online. Now this is way before the YouTube revolution. So back then, video wasn't a staple like it is now.
Yeah.
And our courses had audio clips and pictures and just, whatever. Occasionally there were video clips, but they weren't HD, and they looked a little more primitive, but they were there to sort of help assist. And we were doing courses in technique and improvisation, and all the main sort of components of a musical education sort of broken down into an online form. That was an idea that maybe was a little bit ahead of its time, in that we didn't know what was going to be coming down the pike with YouTube. We didn't know what was going to be happening with video, and we had a very finite amount of resources. And my partner, the co-founder, Len Sitnick, he was really in charge of the financials and putting things together. And I was in charge of I was the chief learning officer. That was my title. And I wrote courses, base courses. And then I also brought in some other instructors as well. But that got our feet wet with online education. And when we could no longer keep up with what was happening on the internet, we decided to kind of shut it down. But what I ended up doing was creating a base exclusive site under my name, Adam Nitti Music Education. And that was sort of like in a way, it was like a music dojo 2.0. And so I was more caught up with the times in terms of the types of media that I was offering and the curriculum I was offering. And that's what got me started. But fast forward to today, for several reasons, a lot of it is just the administrative load. I shut down the Adam Nitti Music Education site and moved things to Patreon because it allowed me to let somebody else worry about payments and tech support and all that stuff. So that's sort of where the educational efforts evolved to.
Gotcha. And the whole time as well, you've been very active playing. You've played with countless acts, and you've had. I remember I enjoyed your album, The World Is Loud, and many before that as well. So you've been in this perpetual motion of creativity and your own music. Talk to us about that aspect of what you do.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were just talking about education, and I kind of, at least until about 2 years ago, I had always sort of had a parallel thing going career-wise with the performance side of it and then the educational side of it. And the performance side was really what allowed me to get to a place where I could do educational things, because the music that I released my first album in 1995. Oh my gosh, that's so crazy to think. So my very first record came out then, and that was the catalyst for starting to get exposure in magazines and publications and getting booked for shows and things like that, NAMM shows, even my involvement with that for whatever reason, finally having a tangible product that represented my playing and my music was sort of what opened the door. But from the time I was in college, just trying to make money for gas, while I was going to school, I was teaching music lessons at like mom and pop stores, and just doing that on the side. And it was something that was cool, that I enjoyed, that I could sort of rely on to be more consistent than the gigs and the sessions, which weren't necessarily coming as consistently or as predictably, I should say. So both sides sort of nurtured the other and helped to sort of step ladder my career, in that, if I released something new musically, hopefully it generated enough interest, people wanting to know more about maybe my playing. And so then that fed the educational side of things. And then I could use real life, scenarios from my music, a real life context for that. And then the educational stuff, if people were seeking me out there, that fostered an interest in what I was doing musically. So it was this kind of really neat symbiosis, but between both sides of it. And, fast forward to today, I've released 6 albums to date, and then some singles, and I have a new single that came out recently called The Canyon Carver. And I've decided that at least for this next series of releases, it's going to be a number of singles. And then after a certain number are done and released, I'm going to offer that as a hard media vinyl CD type thing. Just trying something different this time around. But that's where all of that got its energy from, at least from the perspective of me as an artist and me as an educator.
Gotcha. Now, as this is all part of your journey, you're currently, tell us a little bit about what you've got going on now.
It's a new season for me. I'll start with that. I had been touring with Kenny Loggins. That was the most recent artist that I was on tour with on a regular basis. And I decided to take a hiatus from touring about 2.5 years ago. And while I was doing that, although it was mostly sort of extended weekend work that was based on fly dates, it didn't necessarily afford me a lot of extra time to just do things like my own artistic, pursuits. And it's always been a balancing act. But what I'm doing now is after taking a hiatus from that, all of my music efforts now are just being centered around my original music. And I'm not traveling. I'm not doing any sideman stuff these days. And as a matter of fact, I'm supplementing with web development work. During COVID, I went to web development school and picked up some cool new skills. And so now that is a part of my livelihood in this particular season, which allows me and affords me to sort of stay home and then also do these other things, which is great. So I'm working on my original music, but then also trying to recreate what this sort of educational side is going to be, because the Patreon site where I have those things now that's sort of the home of my curriculum, but it's a place that I want to expand into, opening up more into the world behind the scenes for me. And when things like the composing I do, or the gigs that I play, sessions I do, and just being more of less of just a hyper educational source, and more of this is sort of how I'm approaching things in as well-rounded a fashion as I can. Now, being at home and not traveling as much right now, I'm also playing more with artists that are based out of Nashville. So that's a cool thing. And I'm able to do sessions here again on a more regular basis, in addition to the remote sessions that I'm doing. But yeah, that's sort of a summary of what's going on right now. But there's been some great things that have resulted from sort of changing gears. And yeah, it's each day I kind of wake up and I don't have a plan set in stone, although I do like to put a pillar of goals, one in front of the other. But yeah, that's the routine right now.
Nice. Well, it is an important fact. We have to evolve. And I think everybody thinks, if you think of a failure to evolve, consider dinosaurs and things that are not around. And many of us that have been at this, as a matter of fact, as we mentioned with Bass Musician Magazine, when we went to our first NAMM show and we were talking to many of the manufacturers that we were doing a digital magazine, they were going, well, where's the paper part? We're like, no, you don't understand. It's digital, and there's going to be video. There's going to be interviews like the one we're doing right now. And they're like, oh, that'll never work because people can't take it to the John with them, and they can't read it, or they can't tuck it under their arm and go on the subway. And it's kind of like, well, we disagree. And now as time goes by, there are no longer any paper-based magazines in print. And we've just kept on chugging along doing what we do.
Yeah.
So, and even we will continue to evolve as we look at things changing, because there is that's just the reality of our times. Now, as I look at you and I see that upright bass, and I know you're very versatile, but I do have to ask about getting your sound, because as I mentioned, NAMM shows, there's nothing like me thinking about the Ibanez booth and seeing your giant face with your signature bases there. Not that your face is big, it's just blown up for the booth. So
It's
tell
big
us,
in that booth.
there you go. Tell us about a bit about how you're getting your sound.
Yeah, that is the whole relationship with them has been a dream. I have played a lot of basses, over the course of my career, and I still own a lot of basses in my collection. But the great thing about connecting with them was that when we started talking, they were really, really interested in wanting to do stuff in a very bespoke way, just based on my playing preferences and playing style. Sometimes I've dealt with companies before and spoken with companies before where if they endorse you, it's more of a thing where they really would like you to stick with a stock instrument for obvious reasons. They want to be able to sell what they're building. And the thing with Ibanez for me was I wasn't necessarily looking for a signature bass deal, but it evolved organically, and that's what was so awesome about it. It was a thing where we partnered together, and I got on their roster, but then over time, as I was playing the instruments, we would just have more and more discussions about what would you like and what would how would this improve if you did like this, and then we did the very first signature model, which was a 6-string, and it started out as the ANB 1000. It was a hand built instrument, and it was very, very high end. And about 9 months after that, they came out with the ANB 306, which was a production line version of that bass. And then not too long after that, we came out with a completely different instrument. I wanted the 6-string was very much like a flagship instrument. And if you listen to my solo records, that the type of tone that it has, very, very present, sort of cutting, modern type of tone. That's what the 6-string was all about. But I also had a need and a desire to have an instrument, a custom instrument with them that also was more of that traditional, almost meat and potatoes type of type of sound that you would get from like a P bass or a J bass. So they came out with the ANB 205, and that's the 5-string bass. And when you look at that bass, it's very easy to see right away. It's got a J configuration, and it's got a swamp ash body, and it's got a maple neck, and the pickups are mounted exactly in the same location as like a 70s J, but it's aesthetically and the way it plays is very modern. And that was incredible, because as far as I know, that was also the very first time that they had ever offered simultaneous models for an artist that were completely different.
Wow.
And so the product line got honed down to just the ANB 306 6-string and the ANB 205 5-string. But those are still my main basses, and I play the production models. I have the customs, and as awesome as they are, and I love them, the production models are so great. They're not modified in any way. I mean, they built these things to spec, and they're really, really nice. So yeah, that's the bass part of it. I've been using Aguilar amplifiers for years. I have almost everything in their line from not the current line, but when like from, let's say 10 years ago, like the DB cabinets, the DB heads, and the lightweight stuff when it was first coming out. I fell in love with that stuff so much. I got a bunch of different configurations for different styles of gigs, and I'm still using D'Addario strings and YXLs. I mean, I've been using the same stuff for decades.
Nice. Well, and as we look at the future, and it sounds like there's so many things in flux here, where would the best place, if people want to stay on top and know what you're up to, where should they go?
My website, adamnitti.com, is probably the most central, location to direct people to. And from there, you can get to my socials. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and X and YouTube the most. But all those links are there. Also, too, I'm trying to get better about adding or keeping up with the things that I do outside of my own artistic work. And for example, or since we met, I mean, I've played on a lot of different records from artists and gotten to do a lot of shows, but not everybody knows about those things. And I'm really not the best at self-promoting all of these things, but there's things that I love to share. Two things worth mentioning, actually, if you don't mind.
Oh.
There's this really great record that Tom Hemby is a Nashville-based studio guitarist and composer. He's been really successful here, and he's had a band for many years. And he released a record a couple years ago called Dealin' It, Tom Hemby Band Dealin' It. And it's Keith Carlock on drums and Mike Whitaker on keyboards, Mark Douthit on saxophone, obviously me on bass. Yeah, so that's the band. And then of course Tom plays guitar. But that's a record that I believe it got nominated for a Grammy as well. And we're all just really proud of it. And that's a good representation of our work in modern times. And then another album I'm really proud of is there's an Austrian guitarist named Gerald Gradwall, and I toured with him and Kirk Covington in Europe several years ago, and just had a great time. And just music was really inspirational. His stuff that he writes is really inspirational, and it's very, very challenging to play too. But he's got an album that just came out this past May called Or What, and Kirk Covington on drums and myself on bass, and then Stephen Moss plays percussion on that, and then of course Gerald plays guitar. But those are two examples of things that I just wanted to let people know about, and I'll have information on that stuff too on my website as well.
Nice. Well, there's so many exciting things, and again, I appreciate you taking time to share them with us, and I know out of your busy schedule. So folks, make sure you stay on top of everything that Adam is doing. You've seen him here on Bass Musician Magazine, Adam Nitti.
Thank you so much.